Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the museum's Chats on the Past program, where we discuss history with scholars, authors, historians, and artisans. My name, as always, is Nicole Carpenter. I am the Programs and Collections Director at the Westport Museum for History and Culture. At the museum, we are pleased to offer all of our programming for free on this platform, and we do have a suggested donation of $5 for all of those programs to help us continue to bring you this content. We do ask that you support the museum however you can, and we understand this is still a very difficult time. And if you're able to, we do appreciate your donations. If you've enjoyed our programming on the past and you'd like to be notified in the future, you can follow and like us on Facebook and Twitter at Westport History and on Instagram at Westport History Museum. That will notify you every time that we have a live program in the future. If you would like to view any of our past programs, they are available on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel at Westport History Museum for History and Culture. During our program this evening, if you have any questions, comments, or anecdotes you would like to share, please enter them in the comments box, and I will go through as many of those as I possibly can at the end of our presentation tonight. This evening, we are joined by Richard Deej Webb, author, documentary filmmaker, and historian. A graduate of Vanderbilt University, he is a multiple award-winning educator who has taught at the high school and university level for more than 25 years. A featured presenter in the Connecticut Public Broadcasting Prohibition documentary, Connecticut Goes Dry, Webb is co-creator, and co-producer along with Robert Williams of Gatsby in Connecticut, an F. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald documentary that is a companion piece to Boats Against the Current. So welcome, Deej. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks as always for having me. I appreciate all the work that you did to set this up and you're going to do to monitor it, and say hello to everybody at the Historical Society. I miss being there, and I miss seeing you guys.
Well, we are looking forward to hopefully having everyone back into our building very soon. And we are looking forward to hearing your presentation this evening.
Okay, great. So we're ready?
I think I'm ready whenever you are.
Okay, let's rock. Hi, everybody. My name is Richard Deej Webb. That's my nickname. I grew up in Westport from the age of 8 years old. I grew up a quarter of a mile away from the Fitzgerald Honeymoon Cottage, 244 South Compo Road. And by the way, I lead Gatsby tours in the spring, summer, and fall on behalf of a fundraiser for the Westport Historical Society. So if you really want to have fun, and it's great exercise, bring your Fitbit, your Apple Watch, and it's a 4-mile jaunt, takes about 2.25 hours, and I'll actually take you through areas of Westport, or Longshore largely, but also other places. And I'll show you where certain scenes happened from not only the Great Gatsby, but from The Beautiful and Damned. You're not going to see a lot of me. I'm going to be here at the beginning and the end, which, again, I hope is good news. And I want to thank everybody for just watching another Zoom. I think soon in the dictionary to zoom out is going to have a new definition. So thank you. You're probably getting pretty awfully tired of it. I used to, I grew up again right there by the house, and I used to ride my bike like kids did back then, and they're starting to do now, which is a nice thing to see. And I went all around Longshore. I went all around Westport. And I read the Fitzgerald's least read novel, The Beautiful and Damned. And when I read that at the age of 14, I was reading a roadmap of Westport. It was unbelievable. Characters would take a left here. They would go around a corner here, and on and on and on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start and move quickly through this. So we're going to move with what I like to call all deliberate speed. We're going to move fast in the beginning, but hopefully deliberately enough that you can follow what's going on. So then somebody invented the internet. And I realized that my theory that the Beautiful and Damned was largely about Westport was actually a fact. And I had thought about Gatsby, I kind of have, some dim theories. But as I'll talk about, I read a critical story in the New Yorker by somebody named Barbara Probst Solomon, and that changed my life. So let's go. I'm going to, again, I'll be starting off with The Beautiful and Damned. All right. And again, I'm going to move pretty fast through this part. And please excuse any glitches. I'm sure you're pretty used to those on Zoom. So let's get started. This is my book. I got to do a plug. You're going to see it again. Boats Against the Current. And it's about the honeymoon summer of the Fitzgeralds. But it's more than that, as I'll explain very soon. The reason it's called Boats Against Current is that's the last line in The Great Gatsby. But it's also symbolic of the struggle I had to prove Barbara's theory, my theory, when I talked to a noted Fitzgerald academic, and I said, Westport's, part of the home of the Great Gatsby. He said, Deej, if you get Westport in the top 25 of places that were significant to the Fitzgeralds, it's a noble and it's a totally lost cause. Right here, by the way, is the house. Many of you will recognize it if you're Westporters. And it's completely intact. It's had add-ons. And what's of interest to this photo is that Scott and Zelda, they were here in 1920. They came back in 1924 for this photo shoot. A lot of people think this is Photoshop. It's not. So what I find interesting is that this is a year before The Great Gatsby. So what I like to think is that they came back and they reoriented themselves and refamiliarized themselves with the geography of Westport, and that it shows up in The Great Gatsby. Okay, you might remember that I just told you that I was told I wouldn't get Westport in the top 25. Well, guess what, folks? It's number one. It's number one. They wrote about Westport more than any other place that they lived. They never wrote about Great Neck, which is where the Great Gatsby is said to originate from. And that's also true. Westport and Great Neck are what I like to call a beachy blend of Gatsby. So they have valid theses, but so was ours, and it was proven. So let me just take you through this. There you're seeing The Beautiful and Damned. Half of that takes place in Westport. It's about their honeymoon. Wow. Zelda's only novel talks about Westport in Save Me the Waltz. Guess what? The characters are having their honeymoon. In Scandalabra, her only play, has Westport influences. 5 of Scott's short stories, including a great part where 2 men are in an asylum in Westport, Connecticut, and we had 2 of them. So that's kind of fun. The Cruise of the Rolling Junk is about a couple who are having their honeymoon, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and The Great Gatsby. So we'll start. They're married, and 5 weeks later, they're in Westport. Now, what happened was they were basically kicked out of New York City. Imagine achieving that goal. One of the reasons they were kicked out was they stayed at the Biltmore and the Commodore, the best hotels in New York. The final straw was when they were kicked out because they spent 30 minutes spinning in a new invention called the revolving door. So nobody could go in or out of the hotel for 30 minutes. They bought a secondhand Marlin, and they began to go up to Vermont. They're going up to Lake Champlain because Zelda likes to swim. On the way, they find out from a friend that Lake Champlain is really cold to swim in. And Zelda wasn't really a fan of that. And so Scott said, if Zelda can't swim, she's miserable. And what they did is they basically took a right turn off the Post Road, which is the only road between New York and Boston at that time. And they popped into Westport. And there's a lot of scenes about that. Here's the cover. As Scott said of the artist, he goes, he did a pretty, this is based on them. He said he did a pretty good job with Zelda here. But he goes, that's a rather debauched version of myself. So again, half of the scenes in this novel are in The Beautiful and Damned, and that's one of the things I show on my tour. As I talk, you can read this quote. They talk about going to the house that they would rent, and there it is, 244 South Campo Road. It was owned by the Gray family. It's pre-revolutionary. It was painted gray, and is still painted gray to this day. And there Scott talks about saying that it's pre-revolutionary. Again, Scott once famously said that all my characters are F. Scott Fitzgerald. A lot of his female characters were Zelda too. And so it's autobiographical. Literally, they're going through their honeymoon, and he writes about it, and he fictionalizes it. Again, just to show you another description of the house, and it is identical to what it was today. They've added on the porch to the right and in the back, but there she is, and she's a beauty. Okay, don't worry about this. This is a glorious mess to see and to spring on you, but I wanted to go, step by step through something that happened to the Fitzgeralds and something he wrote about that happened. And what we're going to talk about is, and again, I apologize, I'm going to move a bit fast, but I hope you can get it because I do want to get to Gatsby. But this is an important setup. So here's the Fitzgerald house. Okay. G, it's on the corner of a giant estate owned by a mystery millionaire. Sound familiar? Well, we'll get to that later. And Scott and Zelda partied hard. They would have parties that would start Thursday, and people were supposed to leave Sunday, and the parties would end Wednesday morning of the next week. In one of them, one of Scott's friends, very drunk, starts to hit on Zelda, and she flees upstairs, and he goes after her there, and she runs out of the house. She wants to run from the house to the train station. So Zelda runs out of the house, East Ferry Lane, all the way to the train bridge and to the station. And Fitzgerald writes about this step by step. So Zelda flees the house. She's Gloria Patch. Scott chases her. All right. He's Anthony Patch. So it's incredibly autobiographical. So I'm going to take you through this route quickly. There it is. And by the way, when I show you these segments, I'm cherry picking here. There's a lot more descriptions of Westport. And as Walter Robichek, the great Fitzgerald historian, said, that no other town shows up so perfectly in the fiction of any writer ever. So you Westporters should be proud of that. Goes down the path. What does she go to? A barn. And it's still there today. Just sold, by the way. Beautiful house. We looked at it. We were house shopping. It's beautifully done inside. It's actually not quite a half mile. It's more like a quarter of a mile, but this is fiction. And by the way, if you drive in Westport on South Campo Road, when Fitzgerald writes that this was the only building of any sort between the Gray House and Marietta, when you make the drive to the Post Road from where the Fitzgeralds were, try to find a house that is from 1920. Good luck. There aren't any. And if they are, I've overlooked them. Zelda / Gloria Patch turns the fork, goes down into the wood. That's East Ferry Lane. Sees the road. The moon comes out, so she's running down East Ferry Lane. And I will give you a second to just read this for yourself. Well, folks, here we go. It's a mind blower. I love that Fitzgerald describes those towers that are still there today as a giant spider. Very clever. But look at the color he previews for the first time. The little green light. Now, what's the green light in Gatsby? It's the biggest symbol. It's the symbol. What does it represent in countless of college and high school classes? The American dream. And here, Fitzgerald is test driving it for the first time. Here in Westport, fantastic. And nobody found this until, and I'm not boasting because I'm a former teacher and I think this is an important lesson, no pun intended. But what I did was I read everything the Fitzgeralds wrote. I read everything that was written about them, and nobody had caught any of this stuff except for Barbara with the Great Gatsby. So it's an important lesson about looking for yourself, right? As Charles Scribner III, who's the grandson of the great Scribner publishing family, said, that The Beautiful and Damned was the first draft of the Great Gatsby. She runs on this track, on the pathway next to it. By the way, it's described in the book as a yard wide, and guess what it is today? It's 3 feet wide. When you go there and stop and look down the river, to your right, there's Westport. Now you just see it barely there, parts of Riverside Avenue. But keep in mind, there's no 95 then. Keep in mind, all the stuff to the right is deforested land. You would have seen Westport, and it's winking scattered lights. She goes to the train house, and it's still there today. And what the Fitzgeralds used to do was, after staying up all night, pulling an all-nighter, they would often go to the Westport train station, climb on the roof, and wait for the first train to New York City, which was, I think, like the 5:33 or something like that. By the way, interesting fact, it took about 70 minutes to get to New York back then in 1920, and it takes just as long today. And that's if you're lucky. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to now shift to another PowerPoint. Okay, so please stick with me. I think I've got this, Nicole. Well, famous last words. So let me bring this up.
We have every faith in you, Deej. Seeing all of the points in the Saugatuck area are so interesting. On your tour, you go through much of Longshore, and it's really interesting to see how that area very, very strategically connects to the Saugatuck area that unfortunately you don't see much of on the tour just because of the distance, but it's fascinating.
And folks, Nicole arranges and does all the paperwork for these, and they're getting more popular. So I'm looking forward to. Hey, look, you know what? And I sell this as it's a great walk. You'll get all your steps, you get exercise for the day. Okay, so let me share, Nicole. I think this will work. Oh my God. He can do technology. Well, don't count on that, but we're looking good so far. And thanks for hanging with me, everybody. Well, the old teaching adage, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told me. Gee, there's my book again. Why it's I do want to point out an additional thing here is that it's the centennial edition. They were here 100 years ago, and we had a whole mess of stuff planned. I mean, it's just it's just too bad. There was a lot planned for this, but folks, don't worry. Stay tuned for 2021 because hopefully we're going to get some stuff done. Again, just want to show you. Dorothy Parker, the great literary critic, said that they looked like they stepped out of the sun. They were so beautiful. Zelda's 19 when she's in Westport. She's essentially a sophomore in college. He's 24, so he's a grad student. Their youth, as Dorothy Parker said, was striking. So what do they do again? 5 weeks in New York. First place they go and actually live independently is Westport, Connecticut. In 1996, old friends of ours that lived on Greens Farms Road said, Deej, you're going to want to read this. And Barbara Probe Solomon, who's on the right, longtime Westport resident, had written this story about the fact that the Great Gatsby was from Westport. Barbara lived where the Saugatuck Yacht Club is now. It was one estate. That whole marina was theirs. It's called Great Marsh. The grounds were sculpted by Frederick Law Olmsted. They had a gas pump on the property. It was a massive estate. And what it had, and this was directly across from Longshore, and it was directly across, and I'll be talking about this beach at Longshore that Scott and Zelda swam at, including skinny dipped at, but we'll get to that a little bit later. When I looked at them in 1934, during the height of the Depression, what the US government did was they paid people to do certain jobs. And one of them was they hired pilots and they took a picture of every inch of Connecticut. By the way, you can get that online, really interesting. So I was able to go look at 1934 Westport. Now, Barbara had said she had the longest dock in the vicinity. Turns out she did. They had a lighthouse on the vicinity. Talk about a green light. So she predicated that it was the Fitzgeralds on the other side that would look at their estate and use it as the setting for what Gatsby did as he looked at Daisy's dock. The interesting thing about this, and there's a lesson in this too, was Barbara's theory went against the the Fitzgerald academic, guy by the name of Matthew Buckley. And he did not like this because it challenged his entire theory that it was all about great men, which everybody shares. So he squashed the article. He pressured the New Yorker editorial board not to pursue it further, and it died an unnatural death. So in the film, we got in touch with Barbara. We validated her thesis, and what was great was she lived, as you see, she died, but she lived to see her thesis proven. So she was very, very happy. What's interesting is that Matthew Buckley actually rented my best friend's house growing up for part of a summer down at Old Mill Beach, and he missed all of this. So interesting. Sometimes it's, you know what, you got to take on the big boys, and it's a fight. It's a boat against the current. All right, 1920 shot of Longshore. The Fitzgeralds lived on the corner of Longshore. The house is still there on the corner of Longshore. It was owned by a mystery millionaire. It was a 175-acre estate. Now, just before I go any further, to get an aerial photo of your house in 1920, yes, very difficult, and he had a blimp do it. Matter of fact, he had the U.S. Navy blimp do it because they owed him a favor. Well, I'll show you that in just a second. By the way, when I started my research on F.E. Lewis about 10 years ago, there was a single thing on the internet about him, and he was just mentioned in a single sentence. They were investigating his banking holdings. During the Progressive Era, when the government was trying to temper capitalism, but that was it. Well, now if you look them up, there'll be a lot more. So here's, just to point out, here is Longshore. It's still completely intact today. I'll show you, they've added on something to the front and the back, but it's intact. Here was the path, all right? Scott and Zelda lived, up here in the right. Here's the path that went by this reflecting pool. You're gonna see that pretty soon, and that's important, and this band shell, okay? I'm gonna be also discussing here this extraordinary complex here with this lighthouse tower and his boating facilities, all right? And you'll notice, what does he do? He has a crane there to dredge it. It was better dredged than it is today, but this is Longshore Marina for you locals. It's completely intact. And I'll show you how he used that crane spectacularly later. Here he is on the left, a young man smoking his pipe. That's the back of Longshore, Long Island Sound. There he is in the middle at the height of his powers. And there he is on the right at Longshore on one of his many, many, many ships that I'll be showing you in just a bit. And he's got a cowboy hat on, and you're going to see why in a minute, because he was a cowboy too. All right, here's Longshore again. You know, look, we're living in a time of, people are building big houses. It's like what I like to call the second Gilded Age. They're building big houses, and sometimes with modernized, you look at this house and you go, well, is it a mansion? Well, I do. I think it is. I think many people would agree. But what happens is when you explain this as Gatsby's house, people say, well, wait a minute, in the movies, by the way, the movies are full of mistakes. All movies are usually. It is described as this sort of French chateau with, Norman turrets, but at the end, it is described as this glorious ramshackle of a house. And Charles Scribner pointed that out to me. So it's got a bunch of architectural styles and add-ons, and they're thrown together. And by the way, at the end of The Great Gatsby, there's a child who draws obscene words on the steps. And I like to think that's where they are. Here's Longshore today. All right. And what they've added on to is the front here is the part of the Longshore Hotel. It's under new management. The new guy's a big Gatsby fan, so we're happy about that one. We're making some plans. And the back is part of the restaurant. Just to point out over here, okay, that's Great Marsh. That's where Barbara lived. And it spanned all the way over to here. Okay. Now, Scott and Zelda swam here. You can't swim here anymore. It's the driving range. And one of the problems I had when I heard that they swam at what's called Hendricks Point was that, how do they swim there? But lo and behold, by looking at the old photos, there it is. It's a beach. Now, why was it a beach then? Because he imported the sand. He had 3 beaches, of course. By the way, at the age of 21, he inherited in today's money a quarter of $250 million. All right. And his great was a guy named Moses Taylor, a famous banker. He owned a lot in New York, literally. And he is the 21st richest American in American history, okay, adjusted for inflation. So we'll talk about what naughty things Scott and Zelda did at that beach, and they did. All right, instantly recognizable. There's still that sort of, those trees. It was Lewis who had planted. They're now iconographic in Westport. And those are the posterns he put in. That's what they were called. He put them in 1917. And in Gatsby, Nick famously says, everything's famously said in The Great Gatsby. He said, instead of taking the shortcut to the sound, but for example, once you know the geography, and again, that's why I encourage you to take the tour, they didn't go by the road. They actually cut across the golf course. Shorter, it's a shortcut. But Nick Carraway says, instead of taking the shortcut to the sound, we went down the road and entered by the great posterns. Boom, boom, Great Gatsby. Can't deny it. All right, we're back to that. This is 1920. We're back to the reflecting pool. We're back to the band shell. What is this now? Of course, it's a parking lot. Joni Mitchell said they paved paradise. They put it in a parking lot. But watch what's going on here. You have partiers drinking cocktails. All right. I love the white duck pants. This is 1920. You have the dancers up at the band shell. Okay. Here's something straight out of Gatsby. The conductor and a full piece jazz band. One of the things that makes you in Gatsby, the reader's supposed to go, is that Nick Carraway talks about how Gatsby's got a full orchestra. And there it is. And the Fitzgeralds were there. I don't know if it was in this photo, but all right. He had groomed specimen trees. He had, you'll see Longshore in the back there. This road still exists. All the roads in Longshore, by the way, are largely original, and it's fun to take the tour around those roads. But anyway, he owned champion racehorses, okay? And he popularized a new breed, and let's talk about it. All right, there he is on his horse in California. And there is his Diamond Bar Ranch. You see, he just didn't own Longshore. He owned a vast 8,000-acre ranch in California. He branded his livestock with a brand that had a diamond over a bar, and hence he called it Diamond Bar Ranch. 8,000 acres, it was so much territory that he built a halfway house. You'd travel 4,000 acres, you'd spend the night to get to the other 4,000 acres. And it was so big that, and what he did was he did a lot of different, he had champion hogs, the Durocs, the #1 hog in America, and he developed feeding techniques, automated feeding techniques that are still in use today. They pioneered what they did. By the way, this is now his ranch. It's now the entire city of Diamond Bar, California. Who's from Diamond Bar? Amongst a lot of other people, Alexis Morgan, the great soccer player, and one of my favorites, Snoop Dogg. Okay, now here he is on the right, and he's on one of his multiple champion Arabian horses. Now the Arabian was not a popular breed. Matter of fact, it was really unpopular, but he was one of 2 men around the turn of the century that brought it to the United States and completely popularized it to this day. Matter of fact, he sold one of them to Buffalo Bill Cody, his champion stud Musan, and Buffalo Bill Cody rode Lewis's horses in all his Wild West shows. All right, take a second to look at this photo. And this is no longer at Longshore, but I'll show you a part of it that still is. Okay, here's a tower. Okay, and we'll be talking about that in the next slide. But here is his boathouse complex. It was massive. This is, you're just seeing part of it here. Here's a door that opened. Oops, let's go back. Here's a door that opened, and these spars would lift ships in there for winter storage. By the way, what still exists are these chocks. It's really cool. They're still there today. And wait till I show you the ships that he would store in there. It beggars belief. Let's go back to the tower here. Famous line in Gatsby right at the beginning. Nick talks about how Gatsby's guests were diving from the tower of his raft. So there's the tower, and he had a raft right offshore. Okay, but here's the boathouse complex again, and one of the boats was that one. 55 sailors. 55 crewed the boat. It burned 4 tons of coal a day at sea. It cost $1.5 million in today's money to just keep it, at the dock. He donated this to the U.S. government in World War I. So what you're seeing there is U.S. Navy sailors. He just gave it to them, the U.S. government, and it patrolled Battery Park for the rest of the war. And he didn't ask for it back. It stayed in the U.S. Navy. Here are one of many of the boats. These are partial pictures. You have steam launches, motorboats, etc. There he is. Again, there's the picture of him. Now you know why he wears the cowboy hat. And one of the things about Gatsby is that his first exposure to wealth is when he sees, he works on this guy named Dan Cody's yacht. That's where Gatsby starts. So I like to think he's also the character of Dan Cody, which is fun. One of the things I want to point out here is that he owned 2 very fast motorboats. They had aircraft engines that powered them. They're called hydroplanes. All right, and in Gatsby, again, Gatsby says to Nick, "Hey Nick, You want to come to the Sound and we'll get my hydroplane and we'll tootle around. Well, it was a fast boat, but it was something else that we'll talk about in just a second. So, well, here's one of his later boats. This is the 1930s. He eventually owned a successive series of boats called the Stranger. Okay. You'll notice this is out of Los Angeles. He had another one later that was out of Honolulu. And what he did, he owned in 1938 the largest non-governmental craft in the entire country, meaning what was the only things bigger than his ship, the Stranger, was like, battleships and aircraft carriers. And in 1938, he cruised into the deep Pacific into Southeast Asia, and he secretly spied on Japanese naval and military installations there. And indeed, within 3 years, Japan would attack the United States at Pearl Harbor. But here's the kicker. You're going to notice that's a seaplane. Sea, hydroplane, plane, hydroplane. Fitzgerald used a double meaning to convey the stupendous wealth of Gatsby. And readers would have noticed that at the time. They would have thought of one or the other. They would have thought of the great speedboat or the great plane, or what Fitzgerald meant, both of them. So for example, to own an airplane, and this is 1917 here, was so rare. And to own a seaplane privately, he was such a pioneer with the sea. It was like kind of, I like to say, owning one of Elon Musk's rockets today in terms of, displaying wealth. And so again, Nick Carraway's going either on a speedboat or a plane, okay? And he used the Saugatuck River. He donated seaplanes to the US government in World War II, and no surprise. And in World War II, they were still using that area to practice takeoffs and landings. Here he is. That's his chauffeur and his wife. Got married 4 times. His last time was to the 18-year-old daughter of his college roommate. I wonder how that went down with the roommate. He owned 3 of the most expensive cars in the time period. Adjusted for inflation in today's money, 2 were worth $160,000, and 1 was worth $250,000. In doing my research, I looked at motoring magazines and newspaper articles about racing in the country from 1907 to 1920. And he was in a lot of road races himself in very fast sports cars. Never came in first place, but he had 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. One of the stories I love was when he lost to somebody going, the winner of that race was going at a top speed of 40 miles an hour. So boats, ranches, horses, livestock, planes, limousines. All right, here is where the story gets spectacular, really. So I'll give you a second to look at, try to take a look at that top box on the left, and then take a look at that headline and that picture on the right. Okay, this is the Westport Herald, which was the paper of the time period in Westport. And this is describing the most spectacular party in Connecticut history to this day. If one exists, let me know, because I haven't found it. And this is one of the most spectacular parties in American history nationwide. It was a World War I fundraiser. It went on all day. Patriotic guy, obviously. And 800 cars were parked there. Now, right there, it's something you kind of skip over maybe when you're reading about it, but 800 cars in 1917. The car was so new. I don't know how many cars were in the state of Connecticut. This might have been half of them. But take a look at what he did in this all-day party. He had such varied entertainment. First of all, he had airplanes carry people skyward. This is a thrill of a lifetime. Most people had never done that. He had David Belasco direct a play for Ina Claire. So they had a theatrical production. Who's Ina Claire? It's Fitzgerald's favorite actress. He had pictures of her plastered all over his dorm room at Princeton, and he wanted her to play Nicole Diver in the 1934 film version of Tender is the Night. Who's, by the way, she was making $5,000 a week in those days money as an actress. And she, by the way, she's historic because she's the first naturalistic actor instead of these wooden sort of acting you saw before her. Who is doing the lighting? Who is doing the stage design? David Belasco. His ghost is said to haunt the Belasco Theater in New York to this day. If you go to a play, if you go to a musical, David Belasco was the pioneer in how stages are set up and how the lighting goes. John Philip Sousa was there in this band. Yeah, most people don't remember who he was. The most popular band leader before jazz in the 1920s, a king of the march music. And not only did he bring his whole band, but he created a song specifically for the event. Houdini's there. I think I can assume that many of you know who Houdini was. Most times when Houdini was locked in a box, they pushed him off a dock, but it was more spectacular. Lewis went one step further. He had the box attached to that crane, which was moved out deeper into the sound. He was dropped in the water and obviously came out eventually. Annette Kellerman herself. Who's Annette Kellerman? She invented the sport of synchronized swimming. She also invented the most radical alteration of women's swimwear into the bikini in the 1946, 47. She invented the one-piece swimsuit. Form-hugging, Zelda's favorite swimsuit. And what Zelda picked as the color was this sort of tan beige, which made her look nude, and that was her intent. Okay? Marceline the Clown. Why is he important? He was the single biggest influence on the single biggest actor in world history, Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin credited Marceline for his entire act. He did, in an era today when Britney Spears does a year of residency in Los Angeles, down at the Strip, he did a 10-year residency in New York City at a place called the Hippodrome. And that was the biggest single venue in New York City. And he had his own cartoon called Marceline the Clown. He actually didn't draw it. Here's what really went over the top with this party. He had an entire circus that came out. Now, by the way, I'm really explaining just the big events, but there were other. We don't have time. There were other productions going on all day long. It was kind of like when you go to those great music festivals and you can see, like 9 bands at once by going to different stages. He had an entire animal circus come out. It's kind of interesting to modern people that circus animals were kept in New York City. What they would do, they'd be leased out to the Metropolitan Opera. They would be leased out to musicals, Broadway plays. And they're kept out in McDougal Street. Imagine that in West Village. So what does he do? The lions and the tigers and the bears, oh my, half of them are shipped by barge from New York City to Longshore. That's spectacular. The other go by private rail car to East Ferry Lane, where they detrain, and they march the mile or so it takes to Longshore. Spectacular. The peak of the entire day was when all of a sudden partygoers would start to hear the thunder of hoofs, and they would all look around, what's going on? And then over the crest of a hill came a Western stagecoach. By the way, he imported that stagecoach from the West, being chased by Native Americans. These were imported Native Americans from the West. I mean, the frontier was just closed. He brought in real Indians to chase this stagecoach. Then you had cowboys who were, of course, real cowboys chasing the Indians. They defeat the Indians because, of course, that was what they did in all the productions back then. And the Cowboys are led by this handsome, tall man dressed in white with a white hat, a cowboy hat, and it's Effie Lewis. It went on all day, and it is an absolutely spectacular. I did research, so a lot of bankers and industrialists came there from all over Connecticut and New Jersey and Brooklyn, New York, and adjusted for inflation, they were worth tens of billions of dollars. So it was the event. All right, take a second to read these headlines. Okay. Westport completely ignored prohibition. I'm kind of proud of that in a perverse way. It voted in a mock election by a 3-2 margin to ignore prohibition. Connecticut and Rhode Island were the only two states that did not ratify prohibition. They never did. One of the main reasons was that Connecticut and Rhode Island, and 7 years ago this was still the case, had the largest per capita percentage of Italian Americans in the country. And you're not going to take away the sacramental wine. You're not going to take away the tradition of growing and making your own wine. And what's interesting was that the police force in Westport, there were 4 of them, they were Italian and Irish. So the Italian cops had no interest in enforcing prohibition. And I can say this because I'm at least very partly Irish. The Irish are not going to enforce prohibition. The only busts that were made in Westport were made by the federal government. Okay, just that top headline, when $17,000 of booze was seized. That's about $250,000 today. All right. The bottom left, thousands of dollars worth of alcohol found when the taxi overturned. Well, what was interesting was they tried. It was on its way to Hartford from New York. What they often tried to do was just drive during the day. Now, why did they do that? Because they discovered in the headlights, they weren't headlights. They were receptacles for booze. The fenders full of booze. The spare tires full of booze. The seats full of booze. Fabulous. Okay? And you'll see the Hawthorne Inn. By the way, and I said this in the Connecticut Prohibition documentary. If it was a restaurant during Prohibition, it was a speakeasy. I mean, that's generally very, very true. Okay. I'll start on the right. That's the Miramar Inn. It still was in Westport when I was growing up. It's the most famous speakeasy between New York and Boston, owned by, of course, an Italian proprietor. One of the favorite speakeasies and then restaurants for Jimmy Cagney, Humphrey Bogart, George Raft, and the Fitzgeralds loved that place. And take a second to read from the Westport Herald in the summer of 1920, this description of the accident the Fitzgeralds got into. Okay, so they're leaving their rental on South Compo Road. They're probably pretty tanked already, and they're going to the Miramar Inn to get more tanked. Scott gets in an accident. He loses his wheel. So what does he do? He recycles this in the Great Gatsby. There's a great scene where Gatsby's party is kind of, huge and getting out of control. And one of the guests leaves, and guess what? Gets in an accident. Guess what? He loses a wheel. Scott was writing about himself. So again, as he said, that all my characters are F. Scott Fitzgerald. The Campo Inn, to the left, another notorious speakeasy. You'll notice it's got this steep road here. And Zelda, from 2 verified sources, was spotted riding on the hood of a taxi hanging onto the front ornament down that steep hill. One of those reports says she was naked. I don't know. You can pick whichever one you want. It's just so fun. Now, that guy on the right is Bald Jack Rose. And Bald Jack Rose was from Norwalk, but he controlled gambling houses and speakeasies in New York City. And he was the brother-in-law of the proprietor of the Campo Inn. Now, why do we care? What's the connection to Gatsby? What Meyer Wolfsheim talks about at one scene when Gatsby and Nick meet him was he talks about the murder of Rosie Rosenthal at the Metropole. Well, guess who turned state's evidence about that murder? It was Bald Jack Rose. So what's interesting is Fitzgerald writes about something that Bald Jack Rose was involved in. Bald Jack controlled the booze trade in Westport. So again, a strong argument he might also be Meyer Wolfsheim. Take a second with this. This is our second to last slide, so we're drawing to a close. But fun. I mean, imagine doing your research and coming across these headlines. Okay, the one on the top left is from the summer of 1920. The one to the right is in 1919. What's interesting is that this argues there's a pattern of what's going down at Campo Beach. A lot of people, say, "Gee, Campo's a nice place," and "Gee," as if they've just discovered it's really the center of town. It's always been the center of town. Midnight orgies, fabulous. I guess I shouldn't say that like that, but you know what I mean. What's fun about this headline is there were other ones like this that went into 1920. But what Scott and Zelda did was back to Hendricks Point, back to the beach right in front of Effie Lewis's mansion, was they skinny dipped. Zelda looked like she was naked even when she wasn't skinny dipping, so she kind of looked always naked. Edmund Wilson famously talks about this. The great critic Edmund Wilson says that Scott and Zelda are engaged in the nude orgies of Westport. So, wow, what a lifestyle. Quickly, this is just when Longshore was sold in 1925. Effie Lewis got divorced and moved out west. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it was a highly desirable place. And it's advertised as 175 acres, specimen trees, a mile of beachfront, and 6 baths, fireproof stables, and directly on the Sound. And what's fun is, look at that, 1925, 70 minutes by rail from Grand Central. Okay. This is our film. Robert Stephen Williams directed it and just did a tremendous job. I'm an executive producer. It's based on my story. I was honored to be in it. And by the way, the New Yorker published what they thought were the top 36 films of 2020. And I'm talking about all films made in 2020. And Gatsby in Connecticut came in 30th. So it's really fun. I think you'll love it. It's 70 minutes long. It's on a ton of platforms. The most popular, probably for you who are watching, is Amazon. I believe it's free on Amazon Prime. So treat yourself. The movie came out of the research I did for this book. So you can't put everything in a film. It's only 70 minutes. So this is everything that wasn't in the film, and it's a tremendous amount. Rare pictures that can never, ever be shown again because I have special permission from the Fitzgerald estate. They gave me a really good deal. It's a limited edition. I can only, through agreement with the Fitzgerald estate, sell 1,500 of these of the second edition. So it's truly limited. treat yourself. Locals here really like it because it's a beautiful coffee table book. It really is. And that's not me just saying it. People have given me feedback. A great thing to have on your coffee table, and you'll just love it. It's chock full of groundbreaking information. So,
thank you for that, Deej. Those are fantastic images, and we do, as always, we encourage any of our viewers to pick up the book. If you don't have it already, you can get it at the Westport Museum's shop. You can either email the museum or you can call us to make an appointment. We would love to see you. We would love to support Deej's book. It's fantastic. It has so many wonderful images in there as well. Really quickly, before we end for the evening, I know we are wrapping up, we have a couple of really quick questions for you, Deej. In your presentation, you went through so many colorful characters, and I wondered if you have a particular favorite personality that you came across in your research.
Okay, so I'll actually pick one, all right? But, so I won't give you the standard, oh, gee, they're all great. But that's also kind of true. But, you asked a great question, so what I'll do is I will pick one. Scott and Zelda, just together. Oh, my God, what rock and roll. As it was said, they were America's first pop stars. They really invented popular culture. And I don't mean it that way, but they were the first popular celebrities starting in 1920. So they're a pair. Effie Lewis, that's just a staggering story. So finding out about him and bringing him to life was a lot of fun. But what's interesting, Nicole, is this Ball Jack Rose kind of like got my attention because, he was from neighboring Norwalk. He was called Ball Jack Rose because he had alopecia. By the way, that means you don't have hair, people, if you don't know. He was a really kind of nice guy, but a total gangster. And a great connection to Westport, and just had some really interesting adventures and was right in the thick of it. He was so popular at the time, there was a drink. And whenever we finally do a fundraiser at a Gatsby party, Nicole, at the Historical Society on some beautiful summer day, I think we need to resurrect the popular cocktail of the 1920s, the Ball Jack Rose. So I don't know, he was so new to me. And you just seemed such as Barbara talked about him, he's a very simpatico character, which means nice in Spanish. And I found that out to be true. And then he did really, he went into like early film production. And then he did a series he went on a speaking tour talking about like the evils of, God, I forget, but like gambling or drinking too much for the US government. So I thought that was neat. So great question. Thank you.
Of course. I really like the character of Effie Lewis, and he has such an amazing connection to what would become Gatsby. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
So my final question for you, Deej, is what do you think makes Westport's connection to Gatsby and to the Fitzgeralds so enticing for not only locals, it's extremely interesting for Westporters, but also for so many other Gatsby fans?
Yeah, no, great question again, Nicole. And I'm not just saying that. The leading Fitzgerald academic of today, brilliant guy, said that this was the most significant Fitzgerald finding in the last half century, meaning that he said everything else is recycled, but this is truly a new find. And trust me, this was the pure reason I did this. And by the way, if you want to make $1 million writing a book, spend $3 million. Trust me. So it's not a money-making venture. But I literally did it as a gift to the town of Westport. I wanted the town that completely ignores its own history, I find. That's why you guys are so important. It's just, anyway, that's what I found. And I wanted that to kind of like stop for at least a moment. Just, come on, look around. And what was also great was I always told my students, don't believe everything you read and look for yourself. And what was amazing was that it was all right there. And nobody had picked up on it. And what's interesting about this is that academics tend to be very lazy in certain things. They just are. They'll take a story, they'll accept it as fact, they'll write about it, then they'll write more stuff that they're interested in. And what I also like about that, so looking for yourself, you're going, just go against orthodoxy if you believe you should. And the fact, so just look for yourself, and decide for yourself what the truth is. So I think it was a win-win. I think it was a win-win for the Gatsby, the Fitzgerald world, and Gatsby. And but the whole purpose was it was about and for Westport, and that's what I'm most proud of. And I'm not just saying this because I'm talking to the Westport Historical Society. That's the truth, and I'm really happy I did that.
Well, we are definitely advocates for doing your research, going out and really finding something on your own. That is something that we do in all of our exhibits, working with primary material, primary sources, and really finding out what the truest story and the most complete story is, and not just taking it on the word of others. So we definitely appreciate that effort, Deej. So I wanted to thank you all for joining us. Again, to get a copy of Boats Against the Current, we encourage you to visit the museum's shop. You can call or make an appointment online. And I want to thank you, Deej, for telling us more about this fascinating local story.
Well, thanks.
And I want to thank you. Oh, go ahead, Deej.
No, Nicole, I couldn't have told people if you hadn't invited me. So thank you.
And thank you to our audience, as always, for joining us this evening. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicole.